Hello everyone, and this is our 8th part of the Digimon Adventure Novel reading. So we'll be continuing on with Chapter 3 of the first Digimon Adventure novel today. Again, a huge thanks to Onkei for providing the English translations, as these 3 novels were only released in Japanese. Part 2, The Crest of Courage. The rise and fall of sand dunes could be seen stretching endlessly into the distance. The arid land greedily soaked up light from the sun, giving off a heat haze. The children felt like the insides of their shoes could melt off. Their dripping sweat left soak marks on the backs of their clothes, and sand grains in the wind flew into the corners of their eyes, tearing them up. Several days had passed since Agumon attacked them in the Koromon village. When the rock blocking their path in the cave disappeared to form an exit, Taichi, the others, and the Koromon slipped into it, and it automatically closed up behind them. Apparently, it had only opened for an instant before disappearing. When Agumon didn't break down the cave wall and chase after them, despite having the power to destroy a whole village, Koshiro explained that the exit was probably a distortion that connected to a place far away from the Koromon village. After parting with the Koromon at the oasis, the Koromon were apparently going to build their new village here, Taichi and the others continued on west. According to a map that Genai had sent them, if they kept going in a straight line west, they should be able to come upon a large lake called Temp Lake. They didn't necessarily have anything to do with that lake, but considering that Agumon was after them, staying in the barren desert with no place to hide was the bigger danger. The voices of everyone behind Taichi as he walked ahead of them floated into his ears. "How far do we have to walk? Until we reach a place that Agumon can't follow us. Does that sort of place even exist?" Everyone's feeling discouraged, Taichi thought. I have to cheer them up somehow. Turning around to look at the others, he said, "Come on, guys, get a grip on yourselves. Remember, we have this." And proudly, he raised the crest that he had gotten at the Koromon village for everyone to see. To Taichi, getting his crest was like getting the newest video game console before anyone else. He even thought that the sun gleaming overhead appeared to be pouring down these rays of congratulations upon him. But the other children only stared at it darkly. Some eyes were filled with doubt about whether or not that crest would help them beat Agumon. Others reflected envy and jealousy that Taichi was the only one who had it, while even more were filled with discouragement upon knowing that without a crest of their own, they were only pulling everyone else down. But Taichi did not realize this. All he thought about was that everyone must be pretty tired. It was a sign of his own self-conceit and his innocence. As if speaking for everyone, Yamato blurted out, "Will that crest really help Agumon evolve? And even if it did, would it be enough to win against Agumon?" Taichi's lip twisted with annoyance. "Yes, it will totally help him evolve. And yes, it will get us to win against Agumon. Right, Agumon?" He grinned widely at his partner. Yeah." That uncertainty seemed to irritate Taichi, because he took on the scolding tone he used when lecturing his juniors in the soccer club. "Get a hold of yourself, man! You're the one who's got to make a stand in the front." "Okay." As if the other Digimon understood their position, they spoke to Agumon with half-hearted cheers of, "We're counting on you! Do your best!" Agumon looked at them in bewilderment, but Taichi thought that everyone understood and looked satisfied. But what do we do to make them evolve to perfect level in the first place?" Joe asked, to which Koshiro answered, "From what I've seen of their evolution so far, our Digimon appear to consume a large amount of energy in order to evolve. They couldn't evolve when they were hungry, after all. It also occurs when the partner is in danger." "I see," Taichi said, nodding. "But still, that energy thing, since he's going to be evolving to perfect, he's got to have even more energy than before, right?" A sly grin spread across his face. At that moment, Koshiro had no idea of the meaning behind Taichi's smile. But later on, when he found out why, he regretted what he'd said. Joe spotted an ancient Roman Colosseum in the middle of the desert, where the children decided to take a break. Taichi had confiscated everyone's food, telling the others that Agumon needed it to evolve to perfect. It was as close to being an order, but Taichi himself didn't seem to think that way, and kept shoving more and more food into Agumon's protesting mouth. Agumon's stomach was already bulged out like a pregnant woman's, and it was obvious to everyone that he was full. Do your best to eat. Everyone gave you all of their food because they're looking forward to you evolving. Right, guys? Taichi said loudly, looking for the others' agreement. Both children and Digimon nodded their heads as they quietly bore hunger pains. Inside, every single one of them was resentful. Taichi kept patting Agumon on the back to help more food go down, and faster. You and I are the only ones who can protect everyone, Taichi said. He was quite obviously getting full of himself. Suddenly, the sound of an organ rang out in the air. It wasn't the solemn and majestic sound of a church's pipe organ, but a frivolous one coming from an electronic organ. It was out of place in either the desert or the Colosseum, and Mimi must have realised the source of the mismatch before any of the others because she let out a frightened scream. No! As if to prove her foreboding, the large Aurora Vision screen that was the only thing that didn't belong in the Colosseum turned on to reflect Edamon's amused face. I finally found you, children! Yamato looked around frantically, trying to find the actual person. Oh, don't worry, honey. The truth is, I'd love to be there myself to deal with you guys directly, but unfortunately I'm in a faraway place right now. Superstars are just so very busy, you know. But thank goodness that you sweeties came here, so I didn't have to waste time looking for you. That Coliseum is where I hold my yearly concert, with the seats always packed, of course. With no one but them currently standing among the empty audience seats, the children could easily imagine a crowd of Digimon forced into their seats and applauding Edamon with stiffened faces as guns were pointed at their heads in every direction. Edamon continued, Let me introduce you to a special guest who'll be taking my place. Who do you think it is? Who cares? Yamato yelled angrily. It's a Digimon you know very well. The seat platform directly underneath the Aurora Vision screen split in the middle, sliding apart with a loud grinding of gears. And then, from the darkness that came out of the wide mouth was, to everyone's surprise, a Greymon. The two Greymon wrestled with each other on the field. The enemy Greymon could be easily told apart by the black cables it was dragging around. The cables were connected back to the dark hole that he had stepped out of from the audience seats, and it was probably through them that someone was controlling him, either directly or through a remote control. Meanwhile, Taichi's Greymon appeared to be a bit slower than usual. Every move that he made was sluggish, and his reflexes were dull. It was clear that overeating earlier was the cause, because when he tried to use his Mega Flame, what came out instead was an embarrassingly loud burp. Greymon! The children shouted cheers of encouragement to Greymon from their hiding place behind the audience seats. The other Digimon were busy swallowing up the few remaining pieces of food to fill their empty stomachs and help them evolve. You've got to evolve, Taichi cried out, raising his crest high so that Greymon could see it. If you evolve to perfect level, you'll be able to win! Evolve! But the crest didn't show any reaction, and the other children next to him could see that as well. It's impossible, Taichi-san. You can't get him to evolve. But Taichi didn't even bother to acknowledge their words. It's not impossible, Greymon. I know you can do it. You've just got to believe in yourself. As he spoke, Taichi clenched his crest tightly and shook it up and down. Still, the crest showed no change. Taichi's Greymon was hit squarely in the solar plexus by the enemy's tail, and as he was falling back, the enemy aimed for the same area with a mega flame. Grrrr! Taichi's Greymon screamed with such pain that it made the others want to cover their ears. Lowering his head and upper portion of his body, the enemy Greymon charged with the intent to hit him with the horn on his nose. The wound that Taichi's Greymon had received from the last Mega Flame prevented him from escaping, so all he could do was raise his right arm over his head to shield the blow. The enemy's horn stabbed into his arm, piercing through the flesh. Grrrr! Unable to bear seeing this any longer, Sora said, Evolve, Piomon! You too, Gabumon! Yamato said. Having replenished their energy necessary to evolve, the two of them stood up and began to move down towards the field. But, stay back! Taichi raised an arm, stopping them in their tracks. Don't stick your head into other people's business! Other people's business? What is this guy talking about? Yamato's shocked expression said it silently. It's not other people's business. Greymon's in trouble. This is his chance to evolve, Taichi said. His face was solemn as a father lion about to toss his cub down a bottomless pit. He won't, Sora said, pointing an accusing finger at the crest that Taichi was gripping. Her eyes glowed with hate. She thought it was the crest's fault that Taichi was acting strangely, and she was right. "No, he will! I'll make him!" Taichi said, and his next action surprised everyone. He jumped down from the audience seats onto the field and ran at full speed towards the Greymon. "Hey!" He jeered loudly at the enemy Digimon. "I'm not scared of you!" The children looked on, baffled at what Taichi was starting to do. But Koshiro recognized at once what he was trying to do. He had even said it himself, hadn't he? The two conditions for making their partners evolve. The first was a large amount of energy, and the second was when their partner was in terrible danger. Koshiro had regretted his thoughtless statement promptly after they had arrived at the Colosseum and had their rations taken away from them. But to think that it would cause him to rue them again. "Taichi-san is planning to make Greymon evolve by putting himself in danger. Tentomon, please go save Taichi-san." "You've got it," Tentomon agreed. "Tentomon evolve! Kabuterimon! What's more, Piyomon evolve! Bergermon! Gabumon evolve! Garurumon!" And all three of the Digimon chased after Taichi. As he watched the monitor screen within his large trailer, Edamon controlled his own Greymon with remote control. Rather than as if he was playing a video game, he looked more like he was choosing a song for karaoke. His commands were a string of numbers that he had now sent, ordering his Greymon to change his target from the other Greymon to Taichi. Feeling the earth trembling up his legs as the enemy Greymon came charging towards him, Taichi froze. All of his instincts were screaming at him to run, but Taichi stubbornly pushed them down. It was courage, no doubt about that, but unlike the innocent bravery he had shown at the Koromon village to save his friends, something dishonest was also mixed in. One of them was the feeling of making Greymon evolve to perfect level, and the other was that even if it was for evolution, and even if he felt bad for putting Greymon through this rigorous trial for his sake, he wanted the glory that would come from it. Taichi squeezed his eyes shut. He was prepared for the possibility that he might die. Unable to stand up as he watched death approach his precious partner. Unable to go help. Unable to answer Taichi's expectations that he could evolve, Greymon's feelings of misery and shame seethed in the pit of his stomach, making him raise a cry of sorrow. "Why can't I evolve? All the conditions should be met. I want to evolve. I really want to evolve." As Greymon looked up at the sky and wished for that with all of his being, those feelings made Taichi's crest glow with a piercing light. With that, it threw open the forbidden box containing the evolution information sleeping in Greymon's genes. Unlike the usual white light they had always seen with evolutions, he glowed like a cheap neon light. However, the light wasn't dull and faint, but sharp and intense. It gave such an ominous appearance that anyone who saw it felt a violent dread wash over them. And then, when that light pulled back, there stood, having lost his regal shape, the glossy skin that spoke of dignity, and even the eyeballs that showed his pity for the weak. There stood a violent-looking carnivorous dinosaur Digimon that changed into a bare skeleton. It was SkullGreymon. SkullGreymon bellowed, "Roar!" It was the roar of a beast who plainly expressed an intent for battle. Taichi, whose eyes had been shut, opened them upon hearing that voice. He shuddered upon seeing the overly large form in front of him. The height of that large head was probably even taller than the highest floor in the Odaiba apartment complex that Taichi lived in. Looking up at SkullGreymon with blank amazement, Taichi said, This is Greymon's perfect level?" With the blue sky hazy with yellow sand behind him, SkullGreymon moved around so the scrape of his bones gave an almost belligerent sound as he tested the performance of his newly gained body. The enemy Greymon, despite being under Edamon's control, was so terrified out of his wits that his fear won over the black cables. When the enemy Greymon turned his back on SkullGreymon and fled, the large skeleton monster showed how unimaginably quick-witted he was despite his massive body. SkullGreymon sprang upon his escaping prey, leaning forward to the fullest extent his position would allow to crush him with the palm of one hand. Grasha! The enemy Greymon's bones, flesh, and final cries of agony merged into a bloody meatball pulp. SkullGreymon brought up the hand dripping with his prey's blood up to his nostrils and made an act of sniffing it. Perhaps some nerve ending still remained in his nose, or perhaps it was just an action of reflexes that had stayed with him from a time when he was still capable of smelling. Growl, 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 growl! A growl of pleasure leaked out from between SkullGreymon's teeth. When he threw what was in his hand towards the Aurora vision screen, he seemed to pretend as if he was at a clay pigeon shooting, because he shot out the organic missile's ground zero from his back towards it. Both the enemy Greymon's remains and the Aurora vision screen disintegrated within the flash. A blast of wind from the explosion swept immediately over the children. Seeing the space where the Aurora vision had disappeared without a trace, they shuddered. They felt a renewed astonishment and terror at the amount of power that the perfect level Digimon had. It was an equal match to Edamon's dark spirits. Greymon? Taichi blinked rapidly, raising an uncertain voice to SkullGreymon. He didn't know whether or not his voice reached him, but SkullGreymon looked down at Taichi with his hollow eyes. Did you really evolve from Greymon? Since Greymon's form disappeared and SkullGreymon appeared in his place, that would normally be the logical conclusion. But as he looked at SkullGreymon, Taichi felt that he couldn't accept this form. He just couldn't. He hadn't felt this way before when Koromon had evolved into Agumon and Agumon into Greymon. Grrrr! It was neither confirmation nor a denial. That was because, at this point, Taichi did not enter into SkullGreymon's field of vision. With the enormous amount of power that SkullGreymon wielded, a small human child like Taichi could not possibly satisfy his thirst for battle. The boy was a worthless existence to him. Raising his head like a snake and slowly swiveling it around, SkullGreymon looked to see as if there were any new enemies that he could be entertained with. There, he caught sight of Garurumon. Garurumon had jumped down to save Taichi, but upon the unexpected arrival of SkullGreymon, he had stood back to watch how the situation would turn out, along with Bergermon and Kabuterimon in the skies. SkullGreymon seemed to have decided on him as his next target, because he ground his teeth merrily and stepped closer, one by one, to Garurumon. Run, Garurumon! Just as Yamato shouted at him, Garurumon came to the same decision and turned tail. He could feel the intent of bloodlust coming from the other's eyes. SkullGreymon chased after Garurumon, his footfalls causing the earth to shake. Meteor Wing! Mega Blaster! Bergermon and Kabuterimon attacked to stop his movements. Normally, they would have hesitated to attack one of their own friends, but their instincts told them that doing so would be futile. Of course, they didn't believe that attacks from adult levels like themselves would work on their opponent. Unfortunately, their assumption was accurate, and SkullGreymon's body didn't even flinch when their attacks hit him. Instead, he made a lazy swipe at Bergermon and Kabuterimon with the back of his hand, from which they crashed into the walls and the ground, returning back to their child levels. However, it hadn't all been a waste of effort. It had given Garurumon the chance to escape. SkullGreymon let out an unhappy growl and looked around, searching for his lost prey. Garurumon was rushing up the southern steps of the audience platform. He was intending to leap over the Colosseum's wall and escape outside. But before he could, SkullGreymon had spotted him. SkullGreymon stooped his upper body, sighted his missiles at Garurumon, and launched his ground zero. Boom! The entire southern part of the Colosseum disintegrated instantly. Garurumon! Yamato's face was ghastly pale. And then Takeru pulled his brother's hands. Over there! He said in a strained voice, pointing to the seats in the western section, about 100 meters from where Garurumon had been. Rubble that had resulted from the explosion clattered around him as Agumon rose from within it, his wounded body shaking as he tried to sit up. His wounds were of some concern, but it was a miracle that he had barely escaped from dying in that explosion. Escaping through the space in the wall that had broken down, SkullGreymon jumped out of the Colosseum. The children and the rest of the Digimon were still inside the Colosseum, but from their pathetic trembling, SkullGreymon could see that they were not his enemies and lost interest in them. Grrrr! It sounded like a pleased cry of victory. Rather than the triumph of having brought down his kill, it was more like the joy of being able to freely unleash all of his savagery. SkullGreymon ran through the desert at an immense speed, raising up a cloud of dust behind him. All Taichi and the others could do was watch SkullGreymon rampage from a distance. And that's it for Chapter 3, Part 2, and we'll be continuing on with Chapter 3 next time. So thanks for listening, and again, a very special thank you and shout out to Onkei for providing the translations. The link dump, which will obviously contain the link to Onkei's website, will be found linked in the description. Our Redbubble is also linked in the description, and you can get more than just shirts there too. You can contact us and stay updated. You can email us at LostinTranslationmon@gmail.com, or you can comment on this episode or message us on our website, LostinTranslationmon.com. You can follow us on @TranslationMon on Twitter, and you can find us on LostinTranslationmon on Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We have a discussion thread on With the Will, and a red thread in the Digimon subreddit. We would appreciate if you would review us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and any other podcast listening app that you use. We also have a website, vote in polls, check out our release schedule, and, of course, our blog posts. You can donate to our Patreon, which is linked in the description, from as little as $1 a month. That gets you access to our listeners' Discord server, but there are higher levels and more rewards such as notes, early episodes, and more. And thank you to our current supporters on Patreon, Joe, Anime Guy, who is Anime Guy Kurosaki, then the number 1 on YouTube, Stephen Reeves, who is WildWing64, an archive of our own, Kaidawashi, Chisai, who you can follow on Tumblr at Chisai236, Kyle, Tom, Lizmet, who is Elecmon on Tumblr, Nicholas, Sam, Spiral, Keith from A Computer Podcast on the Internet, Magnus, Annabelle, Hemi, Alex, and Luke. And you can also make a one-off donation on either our PayPal or my Ko-fi. The PayPal is paypal.me/Agumon, and I'm Airdra at Ko-fi, so that's ko-fi.com/Airdra. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!